The kind of day where nothing unusual was supposed to happen. But then, two men dressed like officers showed up at a black man's door, claiming they were from the HOA. Their presence wasn't just strange, it was unsettling. He wasn't breaking any rules, yet the way they looked at him carried a weight of judgment he had felt too many times before. What they didn't know was that someone else was inside the house, someone who would change everything. How far would these men go, and how would this family push back? Hit subscribe to join our community. Before that knock on the door, life in the neighborhood felt almost ordinary. The man at the center of this story, let's call him Mr. Johnson, wasn't flashy, loud, or the kind of neighbor who caused trouble. He worked hard, kept his lawn tidy, waved at people when he saw them, and just wanted peace in the place he called home. But beneath that sense of normalcy was an uneasy truth. As a black homeowner in a mostly white community, he was used to being watched more closely than others. It started subtly. Side glances when he parked his car, unnecessary comments about his yard, whispers that never seemed to fade when he walked by. He ignored it at first, convincing himself it was just in his head. But deep down, he knew these weren't harmless quirks of neighborhood life. They were reminders that no matter how hard he worked to belong, someone was always ready to see him as an outsider. Still, Mr. Johnson tried to hold on to the normal rhythms of family life, weekend barbecues, helping his son with projects, quiet evenings on the porch. To anyone passing by, his home looked like any other in the neighborhood. Yet for him, there was always that silent tension, the feeling that at any moment, something could shatter that fragile peace. And on that particular afternoon, the peace did shatter. The sound of a knock, sharp, deliberate, and filled with an authority that didn't belong, signaled the beginning of something far more sinister than a routine visit from the HOA. The knock came again, louder this time, and Mr. Johnson felt a heaviness in his chest. Opening the door, he was met by two men wearing uniforms that looked official at first glance, badges clipped to their belts, stern expressions carved into their faces. They introduced themselves as HOA security, claiming they were there to investigate a complaint. But something felt wrong. Their uniforms weren't consistent, their badges were generic, and their tone carried more intimidation than authority. They didn't ask polite questions or show paperwork. Instead, they demanded answers. Why was his car parked slightly off-center in the driveway? Why was his grass an inch too long? Why did certain neighbors feel unsafe with him around? Each accusation stung, not because of what was said, but because of what it implied. These weren't real concerns. They were excuses, dressed up as rules, weaponized to remind him he didn't belong. Mr. Johnson tried to stay calm, but their words cut deeper with each passing second. They didn't see him as a neighbor, a father, or a man who worked tirelessly to build a better life. To them, he was a target. Their language grew sharper, their stance more aggressive, as if they wanted him to push back, just so they could twist the narrative. He thought of the countless stories he had read about similar encounters, people of color harassed in their own communities, their dignity stripped away under the guise of rules or safety. He never thought it would be him, not like this, not at his own doorstep. Inside the house, his son overheard the tension. Each muffled word through the door carried weight. Accusations, demands, the subtle but undeniable edge of racism. His fists clenched as he listened, not out of anger alone, but out of a fierce need to protect. He had seen his father endure enough, seen him stay silent, keep his head down, and carry pain no one else could see. The men outside weren't satisfied with intimidation alone. They stepped closer, lowering their voices as if to strip away any sense of dignity left in the exchange. "People like you bring down the value of this neighborhood," one muttered, his words like poison. In that moment, the air shifted. What was supposed to be another quiet afternoon had turned into a confrontation dripping with fear, injustice, and the weight of history. The son's footsteps echoed from inside, each step pulling the story toward a breaking point neither the fake officers nor his father could see coming. And as the door slowly began to open wider, the tension snapped into silence, the kind that comes right before something no one can take back. The door swung open wider, and there he stood, Mr. Johnson's son, His presence filled the entryway with a calm but undeniable strength. He wasn't in uniform, but his posture, his eyes, and the quiet authority in his stance carried more weight than any badge the intruders could flash. For a brief moment, the two so-called HOA officers faltered. They had expected an older man they could intimidate, not someone younger, sharper, and unshaken by their act. The son didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need threats. His silence alone spoke louder than the accusations that had poured from their mouths moments before. The men tried to recover, doubling down with sharper words, claiming they had the right to demand answers, insisting that the family was lowering the community's standards. But the son's steady gaze made their words unravel. He asked the simplest question, one they weren't prepared to answer. "Show me your authority." They froze. No paperwork. No credentials. Just two men hiding behind false badges and a sense of superiority that was quickly crumbling. The power they thought they held slipped away with every second of silence. For Mr. Johnson, the moment was more than confrontation. It was release. All the times he had bitten his tongue, all the moments he had endured in silence, suddenly met with a son who refused to let dignity be stripped away any longer. Fear turned into pride. Anger shifted into resolve. The impostors stammered, retreating toward the sidewalk with muttered threats that no longer carried weight. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, witnessing the truth. This wasn't about HOA rules. It was about control, about prejudice, about targeting someone who never deserved it. And as the men walked away, one thing became clear. The silence was broken, and the story was no longer theirs to control. When the fake officers finally disappeared down the street, the silence that followed felt different. It wasn't the uneasy quiet of fear. It was the heavy calm of a storm that had just passed. Mr. Johnson closed the door, but in his heart, something had opened. For the first time, he hadn't faced harassment alone. His son's presence had turned intimidation into exposure, fear into defiance, and humiliation into dignity. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, ashamed of what they had witnessed. Others quietly expressed support, admitting they too had felt uneasy about how often Mr. Johnson was singled out. The truth was undeniable now. This wasn't about grass length or cars parked in driveways. It was about prejudice hiding behind rules. Racism disguised as authority. For Mr. Johnson, the incident became more than a personal attack. It was a reminder of how deeply injustice can weave itself into the everyday fabric of life. No one should feel unsafe in their own home, yet for countless black families that fear is a reality. And while one confrontation ended with imposters retreating, the fight against racism doesn't vanish so easily. The impact of that afternoon stretched far beyond a doorstep. It was a story of resilience, of standing tall when the weight of history tries to push you down. It was proof that silence can be broken, that dignity can be defended, and that even in the face of intimidation, courage has the power to shift the balance. So, the question remains, when you see injustice creeping into the lives of others, will you stay silent behind the curtain, or will you step forward and make sure the truth is seen? If this story touched you, don't just watch, be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.